Communication and recognition are so important for managers. We can all likely agree to that. But as a manager, do you ever read things like that and you wonder, okay, but what does that actually mean on a day-to-day basis? And so periodically, in some of my upcoming videos, I'm going to talk about concepts that people often talk about as really important to leadership and apply them to real-life situations. So for this one, let's talk about holidays, because as I put this out, it's right after Labor Day. And we'll talk about communication and recognition in the context of giving people time off around Labor Day and other holidays. Now first, communication. So often managers have this fear, like I'm over-communicating, or oh, people already know that. I don't want to repeat myself. But it really is an unfounded fear. In a recent HBR article, this was like 2 or 3 issues ago, there was a kind of a small column, and it talked about how a lot of managers fear that their employees are hearing too often from them. But in the study, and I'll link it below in the description, in that study, they showed that actually it's the opposite. Employees often really crave hearing more from their manager, and very rarely do employees report feeling like they hear too much from their manager. So in terms of communication, there are very few things that a manager can over-communicate at work. Often managers need to communicate because a lot of times your employees are walking around with a lot of questions in their heads about basic aspects of their employment. And one of those is holidays. So no matter what industry you're in, if you're in a corporate environment, on your feet, healthcare, anything like that, employees often have questions around what does that time off look like? And if you think about it, when you're interviewing for any type of job, rarely are they going to give you what the holiday schedule looks like. But for employees, that may matter a lot. So employees may be digging deep on Glassdoor or trying to find things out to get a sense of what time off they may have. Because otherwise, when employees start, if you have a really bare bones holiday schedule and small amounts of PTO, paid time off, then employees may think, oh, and it can really hamper their overall performance in the job and how long they want to stay with you and overall their engagement. So with holidays, many times employees have these questions about what holidays do we get off and what are the norms around those. Meaning, in practical terms, so this weekend was Labor Day. So for Labor Day in the US, that's often a day that people have off in corporate environments. In some retail environments may close, healthcare is still working, but sometimes employees may say, okay, do we have Labor Day on or do we have it off? So having some certainty around that. But also, what can be common is closing for a half day or so before the holidays on a Friday. And it's interesting because I posted about this on social media and I got a range of responses. And some people would say, employees have the day off for Labor Day. Why do they need a half day? Other people said, oh my gosh, my manager every time will tell us like right before the time off or after, like, oh, you can get off, but I'm on the Eastern time zone, they're on Pacific. So they tell me I can get off at 3 o'clock, it's 4 o'clock my time. And so I got a lot of comments like this. And one thing I think in particular is some of those things like half day. And so to get to the first question, like why would people get that? Well, in times, especially if like you've had all summer, people may feel exhausted. And so as you come upon a 3-day weekend or a longer weekend or things like that, oftentimes people appreciate it so much. They're really running on fumes when you get to that Friday, and you may see that. And so sometimes it's reflecting the realities that your employees are already going to be checked out. And so not having them just sit there and moving around the mouse, but giving that time off can show a lot more of the realities in that goodwill. There's other things like traffic or their school, they have kids, their school may close early. And so they're scrambling, trying to figure out how are we going to do carpool. And so I really think, and I talk about this, that you have to find a balance. That obviously, especially if you're a for-profit business, you have to make money to pay people's salaries. Absolutely. But one mistake I think I think organizations make is not really thinking about all the benefits of that time off and thinking of it as a cost. Well, why do people get this time off? They're already getting off Monday. Or how much is this going to cost for us to close? But from a benefit perspective, employees often can have so much peace of mind to be able to have predictable time off and know what that's like. And so for managers, from the communication aspect, a really important thing of communication, and I think if you're in the interview process and you have something that's like an unusual perk, like you have summer Fridays, sometimes on an organization's career page, they may say things like that, like summer Fridays. Well, employees may be wondering, like, what's that? Is that 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock? And so talking about that, some of the benefits during that interview process. We have summer Fridays, so you get off at 12 o'clock or 1 o'clock, and people actually honor that, because that's another thing people may think, like, okay, is this really time off or not? But so communicating those things. And so even if you're thinking, Ashley, I'm not talking about whether someone gets a half day during the interview process. Okay, I got you. But for employees, soon after they start, at the very least, talking about those and saying, before the holidays, this is what we do. And so, again, having that and thinking about, if you can, to have it closed, for that half day, if that's something you can do, and to give that to employees, and this so they can have it predictably. A best practice can be to put that in your annual holiday schedule. So often around October, November, you may put out the holiday schedule for next year. But rather than just listing out those specific days, if you do close early and you can commit to that as an organization, spelling that out so that employees have that predictability. And I can tell you from the comments on social media, people 100% appreciate having that advance, because I saw comments, even people that said, oh, my manager told me like a week in advance. And often people appreciate that communication about the aspects that are likely going to mean a lot to them. Okay, what about communication if your employees aren't going to have time off? That's a trickier one, because especially if you have like a healthcare environment or retail and employees have to be on, it can be a really hard balance of what if everyone can't get that off, then why do some people get it off? And so one thing I think in communication is to proactively say, we know there's employees that are going to be working today, so we appreciate you doing this, and talking about what you can do. So whether that's additional pay to those employees, whether there's perks you can do to make it more enjoyable, and having more of that skeleton crew, if possible, if you're not as busy on those holidays. But again, really thinking at times, are there certain days, maybe not for every holiday, but certain times during the year that you can close for everyone and take that, because often those employees that are in customer-facing roles, often they need to recharge too. And so in the communication aspect, recognizing to them that that can be hard when you're sacrificing and working when the others are not. And so that's some of that communication and recognition, meaning what can you do? So paying people extra, again, having it short, letting them off early and still paying them for their full shift if you can. Having things like bringing meals in, having notes from leadership team, having leadership team show up. So things that you can do to show those employees, like, we understand this is sacrifice and we appreciate it. Those are communication aspects that can be helpful, rather than one of the pieces of communication that I frequently see, which is you knew what you were signing up for. Because that can make people feel really, really down when they're already having to sacrifice with time off. So in communication and recognition, in scenarios where you're planning around holidays, again, not saying things like, you knew what you signed up for, or be thankful you have a job, because those things can just hurt to the humans that are going to react in very human ways if that's the message that you're sending on days that social media and otherwise may show a lot of people out and about celebrating that day. So again, building people up rather than breaking them down. So giving that recognition. So another aspect is in communication, not assuming or expecting that a certain population will always be available to work on the holidays. So sometimes employees without children will feel like, or will expect or see that their managers may assume they're available to work certain holidays. But just because someone has children or doesn't, does not mean they don't have a very full life outside of work with their own personal needs, family, friends, and things like that. So again, not just expecting this, but having communication. So one way to address that, if you're going to be open and you have a shift, is to have a team meeting and saying, we're going to have these holidays, we're going to be open. This is what we're going to do for those working that day. Again, whether it's time and a half, double pay, what you're going to do to make it more of a celebration on those days, and recognizing, saying, those are days I know a lot of people may be off. We're on and we're serving guests that day, but so we appreciate you working that day, and we want to incentivize people to want to work that day and see if we have volunteers. So starting with that approach rather than just assigning people to work or expecting, and having those conversations. And if you're in a situation that you're really having a hard time staffing, and looking and seeing, okay, well, can we have this skeleton crew? Can we limit the number of tables we're going to serve that day? What can we realistically do with the employees that we have available and the customer needs that we have, if that's the type of environment you have? But again, recognizing from a communication and recognition standpoint, It's really important the ways that you talk and treat those that are working, especially around holidays. So in sum, thinking about holidays, what does that look like? And what are your options? What makes sense for your type of business, which may vary if you're a business that has different types of functions. But so having that holiday schedule and being clear, again, ideally on an annual basis, so employees aren't just thinking ahead, okay, what's it going to be for this holiday? Does it depend on my boss's mood of the day? But having that and planning around that as a business, what it's going to be before the holiday weekend, and doing what you can to have a benefit being to be more generous in that time off, seeing that employees will often rise to the occasion and they're going to want to work for you and stay with your organization. So there's so many benefits, not just cost to time off and holidays. Again, thinking about the communication aspect. So telling people what to expect. And then for those employees that do have to work, recognizing what that can be like and the sacrifice that that can feel. So whether that is rotating around or having those volunteers, asking employees and incentivizing them in the ways you can make it environment. Because do you want employees that are going to show up and already, they're having to work, they may be feeling kind of down about that naturally. And then the ways you talk to them. So if you're building them up on that day, rather than saying, again, like, you know what you signed up for, but so building them up and having that environment that people actually want to be there. Because whatever your business is, you likely have, whether it's customers or people that you benefit. And so how do you want your employees to show up for them? And treating your employees in the way that they are in a better mindset to do exactly what you're expecting. So treating people like humans, and often they will then treat your guests better. So overall, that's something about communication and recognition with the holiday time off that hopefully is helpful to apply those in real life. And if there's other terms that you hear that you think would be helpful to give real life examples, feel free to drop those in the comments.